Okay, so a network with 4 people is not just twice as good as a network with 2 people, it's more than twice as good. So the larger the number of people on the network, the more valuable the network is by sort of at a vastly increasing rate. And of course, we recognize this with our everyday interactions with network technologies. You know, if none of your friends are on Facebook, it's really not much reason to be on Facebook, okay? But if most of your friends are on it, then of course it's worth it for you to be on it as well. And I don't know, whatever networks you guys are part of, social networks and different chat technologies, Skype, Twitter, and so on, the value of being you know, part of these networks is a rapidly increasing function of the number of other people who are also on the network, okay? We also see in the new digital networked economy new kinds of business or new forms of organization. Not strictly new, as in we've never seen them before, but more of an emphasis or an increased value of particular kinds of organizational forms. For example, ones that are flatter, less hierarchical, more decentralized. Elio gave a very nice talk at the Austrian Scholars Conference last month or a few months ago on the so-called starfish organization, right? The starfish being an animal that doesn't have a head, it doesn't have a central brain, right? So you can, correct me if I'm wrong, you can cut off one of the arms of the starfish will grow that arm back, and you can cut a starfish in half, certain kinds of starfish, and each half will regrow the other half, and you have 2 starfish. Okay, so these are organizations that do not have one central node or one central brain through which all the decisions, you know, from which all the key decisions are made. But rather they have a much more loosely organized, decentralized structure. Think, for example, of traditionally designed software, like most proprietary software, with a programming team and a head of the programming team issuing orders for people to do various aspects of the job, you know, compared to a sort of open source community in which many, many people participate without a clear hierarchy, and there's kind of a spontaneous order that emerges rather than a top-down, hierarchically planned order. It turns out this distinction is often exaggerated. So it is not true that hierarchy has completely disappeared or that hierarchy is unimportant in any organization. That's an overstatement. That's a myth. But yet we do seem to see more kinds of decentralized organizations and larger ones and more important ones, an increased emphasis on looser rather than tighter structures. This is also a characteristic of the new networked economy. Now, of course, there are also broader implications beyond just the economic ones, right? Why is all this important? Why do people care about this so much? Well, purely from an economic perspective, right? The rise of electronic commerce, facilitated by the internet, by the personal computer, by cellular, mobile networks and so on, right, has certainly opened new markets for different kinds of transactions. You can buy things on your mobile phone, you can shop for goods and services on the internet, you can watch your video, you can bypass the cable company, the television networks by getting your video on your PC or your iPhone or whatever. So there is a lot of money to be made by creating new goods and services, new means of exchange through e-commerce networks, both for consumers and for businesses, so-called business-to-business electronic commerce. Mobile technology, network technology, digital technology is not only created by entrepreneurs, but also provides an environment in which yet more entrepreneurship can flourish. And if we're interested in strong economic performance and economic growth, we cannot help but marvel at the role that digital technology and network technology can potentially play in improving economic conditions. But of course, it's not just economic issues, it's also cultural and social issues, right? The revolution in Egypt is, people call it the Facebook revolution. Okay, so if we are to believe the news accounts that we've read, people are organizing, specific protest movements and marches and so on using Facebook and Twitter and text messaging, etc. And it's very difficult for the central authorities in places like Egypt and Tunisia and Yemen and even Libya, right, to block popular demonstrations and protests when the state cannot control the flow of information. So, for us as libertarians, as Austrian economists, as individuals interested in bringing about social change towards liberty and against statism, right? We have an amazing set of tools at our disposal that our ancestors could only dream about and probably couldn't have dreamed about. I've been involved in Austrian economics and the libertarian movement for, 25 years. And I enjoy meeting people of all ages at conferences like this, making new friends, and asking, well, how did you get into all this? Perhaps you've had the same experience. How did you hear about Mises Brazil? How did you even know who Mises was? How did you find this conference? How did you find these books? How did you discover these ideas? And everyone's story is a little different, of course. But long ago, when I was young, and even before that, people were much more likely to learn these ideas from another person, from a teacher, from a professor, maybe from a parent, or maybe occasionally from a fellow student. But the size of the Austro-libertarian network, if you like, was pretty small. Most scholars working in Austrian economics were isolated. They were scattered about, one at this university and one at this university. And you meet many Austrian economists who will say, well, I thought I was the only one in my country. And I was shocked to discover there was one more. Okay? Now most of you probably found these ideas through the internet. Right? You were interested in something, you were Google searching, you were browsing, you were playing around, and you found out the ideas and the names, and you met other people and so on. Right? So the spread, the rapid spread, the rapid growth of the Austro-libertarian movement, I haven't actually collected the data and plotted a chart, but I imagine it would look something like Moore's Law. Okay? That Austrianism is growing at a rapid pace, an increasingly rapid pace, because we can communicate with each other. We can share ideas. Look at the amount of books and articles, from the newest ones to the classics, that one can get online, typically for free. Look at the lectures that are available. Just using YouTube and websites like Mises Brazil and Mises.org and so on, one can get practically a PhD in Austrian economics without ever leaving one's home. You can be converted to full-fledged Austrianism in your pajamas, something that never would have been possible for previous generations. Okay, many people I've met here in Brazil, and many more young people I meet in the US, learned about Austrian economics through Ron Paul. They were part of the Ron Paul movement, and from reading and listening and so on, they discovered Mises and Rothbard, Hayek, etc. the success that Ron Paul has had in the US is often attributed to his or his team or his followers' clever and creative use of the internet and network technologies. Ron Paul has raised a huge amount of money on the internet, much more relative to the total amount raised than most of his mainstream conventional rivals. Now, I should say that Obama and his supporters were also quite good at using the internet, but among the Republican candidates, Ron Paul was by far the most successful in getting publicity and even raising money through networks, through the internet, through decentralized means. So this is something very important for culture, for society. Now, of course, there are critics as well. There are people who worry that we spend too much time on our computers, too much time with our earbuds in our ears, and we don't socialize with each other the way we used to. The Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam wrote an influential book, I guess it's been about 10 years ago now, called Bowling Alone. Maybe you've seen this book, Bowling Alone. And he complained that Americans were not as involved in civic organizations, social clubs, community groups, in part because they spent too much time watching television, too much time playing video games, too much time surfing the web. People of my generation or older complain that when young people get together to listen to music, it doesn't mean you sit in your friend's apartment and put the music on the speakers. It means everybody exchanges MP3s from device to device, and then you all put your earbuds in. You sit in the same room, each person listening to his own music. This is a different way of sharing than the way we shared when I was a kid. A recent book called Alone Together, it just came out last year, explores this in some detail. As a social critic, worrying that we spend a lot of time networked through technology, but it's not the same kind of network as personal, face-to-face interaction. So this is something that critics and commentators are certainly thinking about. Now, one downside, as I suggested before, is that some people do say crazy things. There are some crazy ideas out there about networks and technology. A book that came out in 1998 by a journalist who writes also for Wired magazine named Kevin Kelly provides many examples of what I consider to be outlandish, uninformed, and quite silly claims about how the world is completely different.